The finest planes, missiles, rockets, ships, and every other form of military equipment, and it's all made right here in the USA.
And given a fair shot, given a fair chance, Americans have never, ever, ever, ever let their country down.
Can the United States fight off an all-out invasion of its homeland, as in right on American soil? Since the dawn of the Cold War, think tanks across the globe have grappled with this question. And let's be really serious about it. The global climate today really makes you wonder, because anything seems possible at this point. Does the US have all that's needed to withstand a full-scale attack by a technologically advanced foe? In March 2023, that question led its US intelligence leaders to outline a dizzying range of national security threats facing America, while making clear that this country right here is ranked at the top of the list: China. The 2024 Index of U.S. Military Strength also has a list for assessing threats to U.S. vital interests, which seems to agree with that assessment. But what exactly are China's crimes? Well, its malevolent designs include economic and military espionage, attempts to dominate the global supply chain, and most recently, a questionable role in the spread of that virus that caused a global pandemic. All make China highly suspect, allocating it the position of America's top enemy. Sure, China's aggressive behavior, combined with substantial military modernization and technological advancements, has made it a formidable global power. But what makes it specifically an adversary for the US? You see, China has been working very hard to rapidly close its military capability gap with the US. It has also adopted increasingly belligerent rhetoric towards Taiwan and South Korea, which are both important US partners. Their differences over these kinds of issues have brought the two countries face to face with each other on more than one occasion. Beijing has been keeping a close eye on US military advancements, strategically adjusting its military posture to maintain its competitive edge. And it has also been working to establish a close partnership with classic foes of the US as well. Foes like this country, Russia. You know that phrase, "the enemy of my enemy is my friend"? Well, it aptly describes China's love affair with Russia, a country that once held the title of enemy number one before China filled its shoes. Russia's situation with Ukraine and its disruptive activities in Eastern Europe and the Middle East pose significant challenges to US allies and strategic objectives. And despite the heavy toll of the Ukraine war, Russia's industrial capacity and ongoing military modernization pose a persistent threat to the US. The Ukraine conflict has proved that Russia's industrial base can sustain its goals in the long run. This war may even strengthen Russia's position as a regional power, necessitating a vigilant and proactive response from the United States to safeguard its interests and those of its European allies. These are the biggest threats to the US within this century, which brings us to the small fry, which might be small, but they do have the capability to hurt American interests. Enemies like Iran, North Korea, and a broad array of terrorist groups like Islamic State of Iraq, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda. The list goes on, believe me, but for the purposes of this video, we'll concentrate on the first two of them only. These threats have driven the US to build one of the world's most powerful militaries, armed with cutting-edge weaponry. That's why the US has spent trillions of dollars, while its proposed budgets for 2024 and 2025 underscore this commitment, with a significant increase from $842 billion to about $850 billion. What this reflects is a determination in the US to maintain military dominance in an increasingly complex global landscape. Money is something that the American government is not concerned about spending, especially when it comes to military dominance. But how did the US come to spending so much on paper anyways? And how's all this money protecting the country from ever-growing, technologically advanced enemies across the globe? Only one way to find out. That's why you're watching another Republic exclusive. From past to future. The US faces countless enemies that hate its guts. This makes attacks on the homeland a big area of concern. That said, has the US ever tasted what an invasion of its homeland feels like before? Let's look at a few examples and see what happened. From beating down the British at their own game in 1815 to fighting amongst themselves in a civil war, America has been no stranger to war. A little bit of back and forth with Mexico here and there didn't count for much. But the Second World War gave America its final and most profound taste of lethal warfare. It left some pretty deep scars on the American psyche. That said, the Second World War was probably more of a game to these guys: Hitler, Mussolini, and Fumimaro Konoe leading the Japanese Imperial Army. But for the rest of the world, it was a fight for its survival. America, in this case, was a latecomer, not interested in making the world's problems its own until everything changed. This place right here was attacked. This is Pearl Harbor, an American lagoon located on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, west of Honolulu. Its peace was shattered on December 7, 1941, under the guns of the 353rd Imperial Japanese Squadron. This attack marked a turning point in US-Japanese relations, which had been on the rocks for a whole decade before it. This marks the major entrance of America to the Second World War theater. Now, in an effort to contain Japan, the US Navy concentrated its strategy of bringing its air bases closer to it by invading islands near it. Its forces advanced from New Guinea towards the Philippines, all the while planning a mainland invasion. Meanwhile, Japan's merchant fleet was systematically decimated by US submarines, leading to a break in its supply chains, causing fuel shortages. In the end, the decisive Battle of Okinawa weakened Japan's resistance. And ultimately, the atomic bombings, Soviet invasion of Manchuria, and the threat of a mainland invasion brought Japan to its knees. Hey, by the way, are you enjoying the video? Please show some support for the YouTube algorithm and hit that like button. Also, be sure to subscribe and tap that bell icon so you never miss out on more eye-opening content. You're officially part of the Republic now. But Japan was one of three contenders in this war. The US played a decisive role in bottling up Germany as well. It did this by supporting Britain and its allies in Europe by supplying munitions. After bolstering its forces, the US participated in campaigns in North Africa and Italy. The main battle in France took place in 1944 under US leadership, which was the beginning of the end. At the same time, Allied air forces then targeted German cities, infrastructure, and oil production. Facing invasion from multiple fronts, Germany surrendered in 1945 following the fall of Berlin. But all of this came at great cost to the United States, an estimated $296 billion to be exact. And at their highest in 1945, military expenditures made up 38% of the American GDP. That was all very well, but the loss of human life left the deepest scars. Over 16 million Americans fought the war, with over 290,000 killed and over 670,000 wounded. The numbers are absolutely haunting. There were also over 130,000 American prisoners of war, of whom roughly only 116,000 returned home after the war. These scars would serve to plunge the world into the Cold War because it feared another invasion, but this time from the Soviet Union. Fast forward to this century, and the board stays the same, only the players have changed. Players like this, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and other nameless and faceless enemies from terror groups. Despite this, isolated by two vast oceans, the United States stands as the most secure nation on Earth. Even today, the undeniable logistical and financial burdens of transporting troops and equipment across these maritime barriers are immense, a challenge few nations can even attempt to conquer. Imagine, however, if the two leading global rivals of the US, namely China and Russia, decided to unite forces against the United States and launched an invasion. What shape would their attack take? Let's take a deep dive into that nightmare scenario. An invasion war game. While many war planners deem North America impenetrable, this offers little consolation to American policymakers and citizens. Their sleep is plagued by nightmares, as history has shown that nothing is truly impossible. You see, it would be truly difficult, but one day, America could become host to unwanted invaders. But how could that happen? Let's take a look. Clearly, before it does, the US military defense will have to see a certain level of decline, while its enemies reach at least parity with it in terms of military capability. There is clearly a threshold at play here, with America's defenses seeming to outweigh those posing the threat. Whenever that threshold is reached, an assault on the US will need to have certain elements to be successful. The first and biggest defense from an invasion is America's geography. It is a continental country that shares its longest border with this country here, Canada. Canada boasts the world's longest international border, a staggering 5,525 miles shared with the United States. This vast frontier stretches across two distinct sections, the contiguous United States to the south and Alaska to the west. And there's another neighbor sharing America's border as well, Mexico. Imagine a frontier spanning nearly 2,000 miles, a dynamic drapery weaving together bustling cities and unforgiving deserts. This is the US-Mexico border, more precisely, stretching along 4 American states: California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. This border is the 10th longest between 2 countries globally, making it the best crossing for an enemy seeking to invade the US. If America were to be on bad terms with either of these 2 countries, its national goose would be cooked. The relationship with Canada and Mexico is the only thing holding the US from sure doom. But since diplomacy in the region's pretty good, an enemy would more than likely need to use America's sandy beaches to gain a foothold on its soil. This invasion would require a meticulously orchestrated amphibious assault, backed by overwhelming firepower, unleashed with lightning speed. The challenges are immeasurable and would demand unparalleled coordination and execution. Take the D-Day landings as an example. During that famous assault, Allied forces, bolstered by overwhelming air and naval supremacy, were able to secure a foothold in Normandy and ultimately drive the Germans back. Similarly, in the Pacific theater of World War II, American island-hopping campaigns were only possible due to the dominance of US air and naval forces. Without this superiority, these amphibious assaults would have likely resulted in catastrophic losses. With the US dominating the skies and seas, any hope of victory for an enemy would require absolute control of the battlefield, which would require a strong and steady supply line to be established. Supply lines are the arteries through which an invasion pulses. Without a steady flow of resources, even the most ambitious military campaign can wither and die. In order to establish and maintain these supply lines, enemy troops would need to gain a foothold in as many deep-water ports as they could. Since no single country could take on and accomplish such a monumental goal, at least 2 states would have to become partners in such an assault. Let's imagine for a second that China and Russia join forces to defeat the United States, as it is their common enemy. Once firm that an amphibious landing is the only way in, the next order of business for this alliance would be to select a strategic target. A successful invasion demands a rapid deployment of troops, necessitating a functional seaport. Such a port must be well connected by rail and road, with deep water anchorages capable of accommodating large cargo ships, since such a heavy load of equipment can't be transported on small fishing boats. That's why the capture and control of major seaports are paramount, as amphibious landings alone, with limited firepower, cannot swiftly secure a beachhead. In case you didn't already know, a beachhead is a secure area of land that has been captured and held by invading forces on a hostile shore. The invading forces would need these beachheads as a base of operations from which further advances can be made. Think of it like a foothold. Once established, it allows troops to land more reinforcements and supplies and build up their defenses. So that begs the question, what deep-water ports could enemies use to land their very significant and heavy military equipment? That's where the LA and Long Beach deep sea ports come in. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are located directly adjacent to each other within San Pedro Bay, California. The Long Beach port acts as a major gateway for US-Asian trade, occupies 3,200 acres of land with 25 miles of waterfront in the city of Long Beach, California. On the other hand, the Port of Los Angeles occupies 7,500 acres of land and water with 43 miles of waterfront and adjoins the separate Port of Long Beach. Located next to each other, together they form the San Pedro Bay Port Complex. It is the largest seaport complex in the Western Hemisphere and handles more than 40% of all containers imported into the United States. Logistically speaking, this complex would be ideally suited for Chinese forces to disembark very quickly. But that would remain just a pipe dream, since these port facilities are also situated very close to a network of American air and naval bases, providing them an ironclad defense. But their hopes wouldn't be lost, because these ports here would be their best bet. These are the Seattle and Tacoma seaports. The Port of Tacoma is a large, independent seaport located in Tacoma, Washington. It's situated on Commencement Bay in South Puget Sound and has naturally deep waters, which brings us to this port, the Port of Seattle. It's located nearby, on the same west coast at a distance of 24 miles from Tacoma Seaport. With only 5 major American bases nearby, these ports would come in handy for an invading army with just one caveat. After landing its forces here, an invading army would have to somehow fight its way south from Washington to California. Moving through such mountainous terrain would be a tactical nightmare for their forces, which would be sitting ducks in the easily defensible area. So that leaves another possibility: American East Coast ports. There are 8 deep sea ports here, so maybe Russian forces landing would fare better in this location. But no, just another pipe dream. This large proliferation of port facilities is defended by a dense network of major military installations stretching from north to south. The sheer number of potential targets and fortified defenses would make any invasion attempt extremely dangerous and make the region a formidable obstacle for the designs of the invaders. The East Coast is also home to America's most strategic military shipyards, which are heavily fortified and virtually invincible. Any attempt to target or assault these facilities would be a suicide mission, given the overwhelming firepower and defensive capabilities they possess. So that leaves us with Mobile Port, Alabama, and Houston Port, Texas, which would seem to be Russia's best bet. Both are located on the Gulf Coast of the United States. This coastline runs along the southern United States where it meets the Gulf of Mexico. This landing would be problematic since it would require Russian forces to spend more time out at sea and move into the Gulf of Mexico, where they would be surrounded on all sides by major American air bases. So in a nutshell, these prospect bases for a successful invasion of the United States are pretty untouchable. Basically, the way the United States geography and defense is set up, there appears to be no real suitable landing site for a large force to invade, which can't be easily defended. Once again, given the country's extensive military capabilities and geographic advantages, any attempt to invade would likely be met with overwhelming resistance. Which leads us to this. The only viable option for invaders would be to coerce or bribe Canada and Mexico into allowing them access to their territory. This is basically impossible, because such a move would leave these countries vulnerable to American retaliation, including devastating airstrikes on their military and civilian infrastructure. On top of everything, Canada shares a very long history with the United States. They're basically best friends, so the only thing left is South America. But even if invaders managed to secure landing sites there, they would still face significant challenges in advancing northward through Mexico, which is also well defended and could mount a strong resistance. But let's say they're somehow able to overcome all of these odds. The main thing to note here is that moving through South America's poor rail and road infrastructure would be a nightmare. It would cost them precious time to move supplies and weapons, time that the US would utilize to move its defense forces through Mexico to Panama. The US would then hold off the invasion there. But let's take it back a second though. Let's just say that somehow they're able to land forces in Canada or Mexico. In the very unrealistic chance that this would happen, they'd still be confronted with a different set of challenges altogether due to geography. You see, in Canada, the vast and rugged terrain, combined with the relatively sparse population, means that there are few easily accessible border crossings, especially around the maritime areas to the east and the mountainous terrain of the Rockies to the west. These are areas that landing forces would be closer to when they first set foot in their campaign. Border crossings are referring to areas that are clean and have resources, roads, and usable space to sustain forces in their movements. And this fact would force invaders to spread out over a large area to enter the country, making it difficult for them to concentrate power and maintain effective supply lines. Furthermore, they'd be vulnerable to constant attacks from American air power. With the United States sharing a long border with Canada, American aircraft could easily reach any part of the country, targeting forces, supply lines, and infrastructure. So then, what about Mexico? Well, while there are more potential military border crossings along the Mexico-United States border compared to the Canada-United States side, the terrain in Mexico presents significant challenges of its own. Much of the border region is characterized by flat, open plains with little natural cover. This would make invading forces highly vulnerable to American air power, which could easily target them from above. American aircraft would easily dominate the airspace, striking enemy forces, supply lines, and infrastructure with great ease and precision. This would make any attempt to cross the border and advance into the United States extremely dangerous. Let's be honest, they'd be like sitting ducks the entire time. And that's why the only chance of success for an invasion can only come from the coastline dotting the US. Don't forget though, speed would be of the essence for the success of such an operation, and the element of surprise would be a necessity. A US aware of any invasion plans would be ready and waiting to welcome its guests with intense firepower. Sun Tzu said it best when he emphasized the central role of deception in warfare in his masterpiece, The Art of War. He said that it is critical to appear unprepared when you are ready to strike. The element of surprise is a powerful tool in a general's arsenal. Those who understand this principle will triumph, while those who fail to grasp it will falter. And that's why the entire amphibious attack as a strategic plan is underpinned by the US getting caught unaware by an attack. So with that in mind, let's revisit the Normandy landings. The Normandy landings, a pivotal moment in World War II, were largely a triumph of deception. Allied forces masterfully misled the Nazis, diverting their attention to a false landing site, while the real invasion unfolded 100 miles away. Nazi commanders were so thoroughly duped that they remained entrenched in their positions, convinced the main assault was imminent. This strategic blunder, coupled with Hitler's tactical errors, allowed the Allies to hastily construct a makeshift port, facilitating the rapid disembarkation of armor and artillery. Had Hitler authorized his panzer divisions to counter the landings, the outcome could have been disastrous for the Allies. However, by the time he released these reserves, Allied logistical units had already established a sufficient tank presence to repel the counterattack. But in a hypothetical invasion of the United States, such a deception would be nearly impossible. Advanced satellite surveillance systems would detect an approaching invasion fleet days before landfall, revealing its target to American defenders. To succeed, China and Russia, or whoever for that matter, would need to act swiftly and decisively, capturing major seaports and holding them long enough to disembark a substantial expeditionary force capable of repelling American counterattacks. To maximize their chances of success, their forces would need to execute a classic pincer movement, converging on their target from opposite flanks. This tactical maneuver, often employed in military operations, involves encircling the enemy from multiple sides, making it difficult for them to retreat or counterattack. This would involve a lightning-fast advance into the mainland, while a surprised US military is paralyzed with surprise, fear, and disorientation. This is their only hope. If they could somehow secure a beachhead before the US could effectively counter, they might be poised for a minor victory. Though extremely unlikely and practically impossible, a number of factors could help invaders gain an upper hand. Let's examine them. Weaknesses in an impenetrable defense. Our modern society, intricately woven into the fabric of technology, stands on a precipice. From the refrigerator that preserves our food to the medical devices that safeguard our health, our daily lives are intricately linked to electricity. A disruption to the power grid would be similar to a heart attack, plunging the nation into chaos. Policymakers are increasingly alarmed by the specter of an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP weapon. These devices possess the terrifying ability to cripple a nation's power systems, leaving them paralyzed and vulnerable. A particularly insidious type, the high-altitude EMP, or HEMP, could potentially neutralize the entire continental United States with a single devastating strike. The HEMP effect, a byproduct of a nuclear detonation in the upper atmosphere, was first observed during Cold War nuclear tests. Though limited in number, these tests, conducted by the United States and the Soviet Union, revealed the devastating potential of this phenomenon alongside the effects of a nuclear detonation. A notable example was the Starfish Prime test in 1962, which detonated a nuclear warhead 250 miles above Johnston Island. The results were astonishing. Satellites were damaged, and power grids as far away as Hawaii were disrupted. The detonation of a nuclear warhead in the upper atmosphere can disrupt the Earth's magnetosphere, creating a cascade of destructive effects. Gamma rays released by the explosion scatter electrons, which become trapped in the Earth's magnetic field, generating a powerful electromagnetic current. This current, radiating outward, is the source of the EMP effect. So you can see, a large-scale HEMP attack could potentially render the entire continental United States powerless if used correctly, leaving millions vulnerable and the nation's critical infrastructure in ruins. It is an established fact that Russia, China, and potentially North Korea are actively developing these devices, essentially smaller-yield nuclear warheads, optimized to produce E1 gamma rays. While these nations may claim defensive intentions, the potential for offensive use cannot be ignored, especially in the face of geopolitical tensions. The systems have already been weaponized and ready to be mounted on missiles or other delivery systems. Just a single detonation could unleash a wave of electromagnetic energy, overwhelming and shutting down electrical grids across massive regions. The impact would be catastrophic, crippling everything from personal electronics to critical infrastructure. Cars would grind to a halt, communication systems would fail, and the fabric of modern society would be unraveled. In essence, an EMP is a time machine, capable of rewinding a nation's technological progress to the pre-industrial era. If they did this to the United States, the country would be grappling with chaos and confusion for quite some time, giving an invading force ample time to exploit the vulnerability. Today, despite the growing threat of EMP attacks, the United States has been slow to implement comprehensive countermeasures. While various government agencies and commissions have studied the issue, a cohesive national strategy remains elusive. The Department of Homeland Security, while making some progress in disseminating information about hemp weapons, has yet to develop a comprehensive recovery plan or planning scenario. This oversight is a critical weakness that must be addressed urgently. While technology plays a crucial role in modern warfare, the good old-fashioned tactic of sabotage remains a potent weapon even today. In this case, sabotage would involve an enemy infiltrating key military facilities and conducting coordinated strikes to cripple the United States' ability to respond effectively. While these facilities are heavily fortified, they aren't invulnerable. A successful sabotage operation could be a decisive factor in the outcome of a conflict. But today, enemies have found new and more profound ways to use sabotage to gain bigger goals. Here's a case in point. In early July 2024, U.S. military bases in Europe were put on high alert due to threats of sabotage against U.S. military facilities and military personnel by Russian-backed individuals. This was followed by the arrests of 2 individuals in April in Germany, one Russian and the other of German citizenship. They are suspected of spying for Russia and preparing to sabotage a number of U.S. bases in Europe, and these arrests were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader Russian campaign aimed at disrupting the flow of Western weapons to Ukraine. According to American and European security officials, Russian military intelligence is orchestrating these attacks to sow fear and uncertainty, undermining public support for Ukraine and hindering the supply of vital military aid. In this instance, attempted sabotage was tied in with the use of a bigger tool. It's called fifth-generation warfare, which brings us to our next area of concern: divide and conquer. This has been an almost foolproof tactic that's been used since the beginning of time, and today is no different. The age-old art of war has evolved, transforming from a clash of armies on the battlefield to a covert battle for hearts and minds. Today's version of this tactic is sowing the seeds of discontent amongst the general public through the internet. Over 400 million terabytes of data are created each day and exchanged on the internet, most of it unsupervised, making it an exceptionally effective tool for fifth-generation warfare. This is warfare that's conducted primarily through non-kinetic military action, such as social engineering, misinformation, cyber attacks, along with emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence and fully autonomous systems. It's been described by Daniel Abbott as a war of information and perception. It links in very deeply with cyber warfare, if you really think about it. But although there's no widely agreed upon definition of fifth-generation warfare, it is primarily based on spreading misinformation or outright propaganda. It's a strategy to weaken nations from within. By weaponizing social media, misinformation, and cyber attacks, foreign powers can manipulate public opinion, divide societies, and erode national cohesion. The goal is to create a climate of distrust, uncertainty, and paralysis, rendering a nation vulnerable to external influence and internal strife. An attack of this nature is already being waged in the United States through social media sites. Very much conscious of the enemy's designs, the US government has already taken some controversial steps to curtail these attacks. An example is President Joe Biden signed a bill on April 24, 2024, that would ban TikTok, the short-form video app owned by Chinese company ByteDance. But taking it a step further, there's another type of attack which could cripple the US military defense structures. One that's less obvious to the naked eye because it's practically invisible. Welcome to the world of cyber attacks. In the age of information, the battlefield has expanded beyond physical borders. Cyber attacks are a potent weapon in the modern arsenal. They can cripple critical infrastructure, disrupt economies, and undermine national security. From crippling government networks to disrupting essential services like water and electricity, the potential damage can be immeasurable. The primary goal of cyber warfare is to weaken, disrupt, or destroy an adversary's capabilities. Deception, a cornerstone of military strategy for centuries, has found a new and insidious form in the digital realm. In 2013, Air Force General William M. Fraser III told the Senate Armed Services Committee that U.S. Transportation Command was hit by almost 45,000 cyber attacks during 2011 and quadrupled that number in 2012. Something to note, though, is that the U.S. has several defense arrangements to protect itself from cyber attacks, one of them being the United States Cyber Command, or U.S. Cybercom. So it's clear that the consequences from a successful invasion of the United States are dire. But what if the invasion's intentions extend beyond mere conquest? What if their goal is not to govern, but to destroy and to reduce the nation to ashes? Well, biological and chemical warfare, while extreme, are not entirely inconceivable. The consequences would be catastrophic, and not only for the United States, but for the entire world. Of the many biotechnology military applications, the creation of biological weapons is the most lethal and offensive. 17 countries have either had, at some point in history, or are today suspected of currently having a biological weapons program. They include Canada, China, Cuba, France, Germany, Iran, Iraq, Israel, Japan, Libya, North Korea, Russia, South Africa, Syria, Taiwan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Meanwhile, the use of chemical weapons has allegedly been seen on battlefronts even recently. Both agents are weapons of extreme measures, capable of decimating entire populations, and can only convert a war into a zero-sum game, which is why it's right up there in the list of weapons of mass destruction. To counter any such threat, the US has run its own programs of biological and chemical warfare, which is the only possible deterrence to an enemy determined to use them. And finally, we arrive at the most terrifying weapon of all: nuclear weapons. These are the ultimate tools of annihilation, capable of bringing about a global apocalypse. Their destructive power is so immense that their use would be equivalent to madness. Any nuclear exchange would result in a devastating chain reaction, leaving no victor and ensuring the end of civilization as we know it. Let's be honest, the second the US sees an enemy ICBM firing up with a nuclear payload, it would be game over. The military would be forced to launch its own weapons arsenal if that were the case, which is significant. The United States maintains a formidable nuclear arsenal, consisting of over 3,700 known warheads, including 1,770 deployed warheads and over 1,900 reserved for operational forces. Additionally, about 1,340 retired warheads await dismantlement. Of the deployed warheads, 400 are mounted on intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, 970 on submarine-launched ballistic missiles, or SLBMs, and 300 are stationed at bomber bases. Also, approximately 100 tactical bombs are deployed at European bases. And currently, the US is embarking on a massive nuclear modernization program aimed at replacing every nuclear delivery system with newer, more advanced versions. This ambitious project carries a price tag of over $1.7 trillion. It's a big sum, but this is a subject that the US does not play around with, no matter the cost. Strengths of the US defense. As we explained before, for any invasion plan to be successful, it would have to be fogged in secrecy and complete radio silence, so as to not tip the US defense forces off and give them a chance to mount a counter-offensive. Knowledge is power, and for the US, the knowledge of any war preparations its enemy is making for an invasion is of utmost importance. For this purpose, the US has an arsenal of technology aiding it in keeping tabs on all enemy activities, earning it the dubious title among the rest of the world as the surveillance empire. The United States possesses a vast network of surveillance satellites orbiting Earth, providing high-resolution imagery for intelligence gathering and reconnaissance. This network also facilitates secure military communications worldwide and enables the interception and analysis of foreign communications. Additionally, these systems support navigation, timing, and early missile warning for the US military. That's where the SpaceX Starshield business unit comes in. It's under a $1.8 billion contract with the National Reconnaissance Office and is developing a new surveillance network for the US. This project is part of a broader trend of the Pentagon investing in large-scale satellite constellations to support ground forces. These satellites can detect and track troop movements, providing advanced warning of potential threats. The U.S. military also operates the Defense Support Program, a satellite system that provides early warning of missile launches, space launches, and nuclear detonations. Its latest projects in the pipeline include the groundbreaking application of artificial intelligence. AI is revolutionizing the field by analyzing vast amounts of satellite data with unprecedented speed and accuracy. By identifying patterns and anomalies, AI is empowering the military to anticipate potential threats and make informed decisions, shaping the future of space technology as well. But that's not all. The U.S. drone industry leveraged the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan as a proving ground, significantly advancing its capabilities. While primarily focused on intelligence gathering and surveillance, this initial role has expanded considerably over the years, and as a result, the U.S. now possesses an extraordinarily sophisticated intelligence and early warning network encompassing its borders. Any potential adversary seeking to invade would need to employ unconventional tactics to circumvent these advanced aerial defenses. But drones are a very small part of huge and lethal military machinery. The U.S. military, a force of nearly 3 million personnel spread across 6 branches, maintains a global presence with bases in over 80 countries. Its mission? To protect and advance U.S. interests across the globe. While the official count suggests 750 bases, the actual number may be larger due to undisclosed locations. The Pentagon's budget for civilian employees stands at a substantial 780,000 personnel, supporting the extensive operations of this formidable military, currently the 3rd largest in the world, but second in capability to none. And then there's the U.S. Space Force, or USSF, established in December 2019 by Donald Trump. It is the 6th branch of the U.S. military, designed to ensure American dominance in space. As space becomes a critical arena for geopolitical competition, the Space Force plays a vital role in national security. It protects U.S. interests by overseeing satellite communications, GPS navigation, missile detection, and space-based intelligence operations essential for modern warfare. In an age where adversaries like China and Russia are rapidly developing anti-satellite weapons and jamming technologies, the Space Force focuses on space superiority, resilience, and rapid deployment of assets. Its Space Operations Command coordinates global defense systems, while its Space and Missile Systems Center develops cutting-edge technologies for future conflicts. And the biggest point of them all is that the Space Force's mission extends beyond defense, influencing global power structures, as whoever controls space may dominate modern warfare in the future. With its growing fleet of space vehicles and skilled personnel, the Space Force stands at the frontier of the next geopolitical battlefield, one that's no longer constrained to Earth. These are reasons why the U.S. military reigns supreme as the world's most powerful force, according to a comprehensive global ranking by Global Firepower in 2024. A comprehensive assessment, considering over 60 factors, including troop numbers, equipment, and financial stability, unequivocally places the United States at the pinnacle of global military might. The Army's land power is supported by a massive inventory of over 360,000 vehicles, 4,700 tanks, and tons of additional critical artillery and missile systems, highlighting the extensive ground combat readiness of the U.S. military. The budget for land power alone is about $14 billion, focusing on the modernization of combat equipment for both the Army and Marine Corps, including vehicles like the Armored Multi-Purpose Vehicle and the Amphibious Combat Vehicle. But back up for a second though. There's also the Navy, boasting an unmatched arsenal of 92 destroyers and a whopping 11 aircraft carriers. Total spend? The Navy's budget allocation for 2024 stands at $48.1 billion, covering new constructions like 9 Battle Force ships and continuing funding for Ford-class nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and Columbia ballistic missile submarines. The U.S. air and naval arms work in tandem with its ground forces. For this reason, the United States stands as a maritime titan, possessing a blue water navy capable of dominating the open ocean. Unlike nations constrained by geography or resources, the U.S. Navy operates across vast stretches of water, projecting power and influence worldwide. It doesn't stop in the ocean, though. The military capabilities extend into the sky, with over 13,300 aircraft and almost 1,000 attack helicopters, the largest of any nation. The U.S. military's aerial dominance is absolutely indisputable. While Russia and China follow in its footsteps, a lot of their high-tech aerial projects are either in testing, copied from the United States, or aren't reliable enough to be considered a threat in the aerial battlefield. The sheer scale and capability of the U.S. Air Force and its ready-to-go aerial assets that have proven track records solidify its position as the world's preeminent aerial military power. So, with the Air Force boasting over 13,300 aircraft, the United States Defense Plan aims to keep a focus on maintaining readiness across various categories such as fighters, attack aircraft, transports, and more. This includes almost 1,900 fighters, among others. The budget for air power in 2024 was over $61 billion, dedicated to developing, modernizing, and procuring lethal air dominance. This includes investments in fighters like the undisputed King of the Sky, the F-22, the F-35, F-15EX, the B-21 bomber, and countless other mobility and specialized support and attack aircraft. Let's jump even further. Do you still remember all that amazing US geography that puts up half the defense needed by the country? Well, here's another way it's going to help it toss out any invaders on US soil: a civilian population armed with an estimated 390 million firearms. That's the Second Amendment of the United States in full force, my friends. This unparalleled level of gun ownership, approximately 120 guns per 100 people, could pose a significant challenge to any invading force. In a scenario of foreign occupation, armed citizens would easily mount a widespread guerrilla resistance, complicating military operations. But don't forget the military at home, whose extensive combat experience over the past century, including recent campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq, provides a significant advantage over a country like, say, China. While neither the Afghan nor Iraqi wars resulted in decisive victories, the US gained valuable battlefield knowledge and tested its weapons technology. In contrast, China's last major conflict was the brief Sino-Vietnamese War of 1979, which leaves its current military with limited combat experience. And what's even further to that is that they're aging. You should watch our video on China, Vietnam, and the United States to learn more about that. Link in the description. Russia, on the other hand, is a bit more complicated. Their military and weaponry is getting a lot of strategic wartime in the Ukraine theater. But that's a heck of a rabbit hole type of topic for another video. In the end, the outcome of a hypothetical invasion of the United States is unpredictable, as warfare often hinges on unexpected events and strategic brilliance. While unity can strengthen a nation in times of crisis, the greatest threat to America may ultimately come from within. It's currently facing a lot of internal struggles and corruption on the highest levels of government. There's a lot going on that can be attributed to an internal war of its own. But that said, getting back to our main topic, it's crucial to understand that any conflict between the world's top military powers, including an invasion of the US, would result in a catastrophic outcome with immense human suffering. Any victory an adversary would achieve by some miracle would be a Pyrrhic one. Enjoyed this Republic exclusive? Make sure you're subscribed and click on one of these thumbnails to dive into more enlightening content. See you soon.